I'm not sure whether you bring stuff and talk about it, or you bring somebody and talk about them. We aren't quite sure, but you'll be given information about it over the summer. For October, we were proposing a program about local ghost stories, but we've kind of decided to postpone it for a while so that, well, a few of us can get more into the spirit at a later time. We've decided instead to have a program about Hurricane Hazel. We're going to have Hurricane Hazel night. It's the 40th anniversary in October. So if you've got scrapbooks, memories, anything that's got to do with Hurricane Hazel, start digging them out. Let's kind of see who we've got here tonight. We've got a really big crowd of people, and I'm sure they've come from a variety of interesting places. Besides our speaker, I'm going to find out who has been around. Let's see. Did anybody ever attend classes here? Put your hand up. Classes. Holy smokes, got a big crowd there. Thank you kindly. Did anybody teach here presently or in the past? Put your hands way up. Oh, several people there, okay.
How about the future?
What? That's the next question. Was anybody going to be teaching here in September? Oh, Peter's here. Okay. Is there anybody from the York Region Board of Education who's a trustee here?
No.
No? Not? The gentleman in the corner, perhaps? No? Okay. Oh, another important question. Is there anybody here from the East Gwillimbury Historic Society?
She's coming. This is her. She's practicing for the ghost one.
Okay. Well, we have a little running battle between the two historic societies about John Candy, and they claim he lived there, and we claim he was born
He
here.
lived in East Gwillimbury.
That's fine, but I've got
He chose to live there.
I've got real evidence that John Candy probably walked by this school once.
Oh.
Okay?
Yeah, we let him do
I
that.
think he walked by here when he was shooting his last movie, Hostage for a Day, because the chase scenes were all shot around here. And I don't know if the school was in the TV show or not, but it was definitely shot in the neighborhood. Tonight it's appropriate that we're meeting for a presentation on schools out. High schools are wrapping up tomorrow, and the elementary schools are wrapping up in the next few days. This building's about to undergo a change of its own, if you aren't already aware of it. By the end of the season, it's going to be converted from an elementary school to a satellite campus of Newmarket High School. And as an aside to that, if you read the local papers, you know now that Newmarket High School has been given a government grant to build a new Newmarket High School, tentatively scheduled for 1995. So this Newmarket High School is the oldest high school in the region. It's a special treat for me to be able to introduce our speaker for the evening. Anne Logan is a person I met about a year ago on one of my travels, and when I was introduced to her, I said, gee, you should really come and speak to our Historic Society about your fascinating work. She's the author of a couple books. Obviously, The School's Outline, which some of you are acquainted with, and she's written this other one called Rare Jewel for a King, about a tribute to King Clancy. And back in February, they had an article about her in the Harold Smith magazine, if you subscribe to that. She's a freelance writer, researcher, and to me, she's a wee bit of a celebrity. And she has this fascination with schoolhouses, and this evening she's going to share them with you. She's visited lots of schoolhouses. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce my friend, Anne Logan.
Well, thank you very much. I held my breath with the Stanley Cup finals. When they went to the 7th game, I thought, my God, if we go to 7 games and it's on Wednesday night, I'm going to be there in an absolutely empty room. Doug asked me to do this last September, I think, and I was taking a course on Wednesday nights for which attendance was part of your mark, and I didn't dare book off, because you're bound to get the flu or something happen. I couldn't take that chance. So I thought, here we postponed it till June, and they're going to have the final game that night. However, here we are, they didn't. We're free and clear. But I've got some pictures on schools, and before I show you those, I also have a brief history on schools and schoolhouses, because to appreciate the pictures, I think you have to know a bit about the history. And some of it's quite amusing. Some of it you may fall asleep for in this heat. And it only runs about 3 hours, and then I get to the slides, so, you know, not a long evening. Don't worry, that part doesn't even get used. Unless you ask a lot of questions, I have to refer to that. But to speak of schoolhouses, you first have to know something about education. Originally, this took place in the home with all the children gathering together and being taught by a teacher who lived with one of the families. As the number of pupils grew, everyone pitched in to build a school. As the design they were most familiar with was that of a house, although needing only one room, the building they constructed became known as a schoolhouse. 100 years later, when these structures had outgrown their usefulness, many have gone full circle and been converted back to homes. And as you will see, most of the pictures, well, no, I have both. My book originally was to be any kind of a schoolhouse. The publisher decided he wanted only those converted into homes. So the ones in the book are only those that are homes. But there are all sorts of weird and wonderful things that schoolhouses have become. And specifically, I'm talking about the one-room school, which this technically isn't. The Upper Canadian government's first involvement was to pass the Common School Act in 1816. All this did was allow the residents of a town or a village to have a school if they wished one, and the government gave them $25 toward the teacher's salary. The rest was entirely up to the residents themselves, which meant they had to build and maintain the school, elect 3 trustees who would collect the fees, make the rules, choose the textbooks, and hire and fire the teachers. As the government itself became more organized, so too did education. Bishop John Strachan was the first big influence, and he unified the schools under one board of education, with himself as head, of course, and this he did in 1823. His successor was also, in the religious whatever, he was a Methodist minister, the Reverend Dr. Edgerton Ryerson. He created the Common School Act of 1841, which was the first to introduce compulsory property taxation to support elementary schools. By 1871, 30 years later, education was made compulsory. By the year of Ryerson's retirement in 1876, he was allowed to accept an invitation to enter a display in a Department of Education exhibit in the U.S. Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. This is a long, boring paragraph, but it's very significant for Ontario. Ontario really only went there to learn, but came away very proud as their display turned out to be the envy of all the other entrants. And this is in Philadelphia with entries from all over the world. It was like an expo, only in 1876. One of my slides shows the school which won a design award at that fair. The Minister of Education for France referred to our province's exhibit as follows, quote, "To make a brilliant educational exhibition by the side of that of the United States was not an easy thing to do, and for Ontario to have succeeded in doing it goes to prove that her schools are in a very prosperous position," end quote. Many of the designs for Ontario schoolhouses are adaptations of those in the United States. Their first manual on schoolhouse architecture came out in 1870, ours followed in 1876. But it is amusing to look at the designs. You would swear they had a Xerox copier. They're absolutely copies of the American ones. The design manual in some aspects makes as much sense today as it did then. One of the theories Dr. Ryerson had was for the choice of location for the schools. Quote, "It is highly desirable to remove as far as possible all obstacles that interfere with the education of youth. The very place of instruction should be rendered as attractive as possible. If the schoolhouse should happen to be the meanest house in the neighborhood, the impression of the children attending it would naturally be that it was one of the meanest things in the world to attend school. Whereas if the school is neat, elegant, and attractive, as it should be, the impression fixed in the minds of the children would be that school was a place of power, influence, and importance. In erecting a schoolhouse, one of an inferior or faulty style of architecture is just as expensive, if not more so, than one of a neat and elegant design," end quote. And I think that makes such sense. It applies to anything. It's just as pricey to build a cheap one as it is to build a good one. The manual contained 270 pages of instructions for the building of schoolhouses. I'm only going to read 269 of the 270, and was delivered to every trustee and school section. Although a very serious matter in those days, some of the excerpts seem somewhat ridiculous today. Dr. John Hodgins, its creator, writes of the school location, quote, "It should have a pleasant location, not on a highway. nor to be near noisy factories, distilleries, or porkhouses. And at a safe distance from all sources of malaria. Nor is it advisable for any reason to place it close to a burial ground. Its surroundings are potent educators, not to be lightly esteemed, neglected, or despised, end quote. I can say from my own experience that many schools did not abide by these rules, as some are close to main roads, some are by railways, and I have seen some which are surrounded on 3 sides by cemeteries. Would it be easier for you all if I went to the front so you don't have to turn around and look? And I'll come back when I do the whatever? It seems a shame that you're all being so polite. You're all going to end up with stiff necks. The general rule was for the lot size to be an acre of land, and if that was not available, a half an acre was acceptable. The building was to be near the center of the lot, with the front facing the street, leaving room in the back for the outhouses. These were sometimes called privies, conveniences, apartments, or offices, and were also the subject of strict rulings. Quote, a double privy should never be erected, or so arranged as to shut out the intrusive gaze. It cannot be made impervious to sound, and the vicious may take advantage of its construction to outrage the feelings of the pure-minded without the fear of detection. There should, of course, be, you can see why I can't memorize this, there should, of course, be 2 privies, and they should be so separate that neither in approaching nor occupying them can there be either sight or sound observed in passing from one to the other. This cannot be effected by a mere partition. Nothing can secure the object but considerable distance, or extra heavy brick or stone walls resting on the ground. In omitting this precaution, mistakes which should never occur are common, whereas they are too serious ever to be made. If designed properly, they cannot fail to produce delicacy and refinement. End quote. Not the way I usually talk, but anyway. Eventually, nearly all of these outhouses were torn down when the new pail-a-day system arrived, which brought with it a common identifying feature of a schoolhouse, which I call the Johnny Post. This is the pipe for ventilation which runs out through the roof. Other buildings usually have 1, or if 2, they are at random. But with a school, they are always, bless you, 1 on either side or side by side. Sometimes a school has been so changed in appearance, this is the only clue to its original use. You'll see some of these things in the pictures. Although a fence was called for, it was often never erected, usually due to lack of funds. The basic reason for the fence was to keep the cattle out, but as most farmers fenced anyway to keep them in, that seemed rather unnecessary. Instead, the schools usually planted trees, maples, elms, sometimes evergreens. The planting was often done by the students on the proclaimed Arbor Day, but to the best of my knowledge, I have not found that there is any set proclaimed Arbor Day. Every school area had their own Arbor Day. It's not like the 24th of May. An acre lot surrounded by such trees with no house or a fairly modern one built is usually proof that that land once had a schoolhouse on it. Walks were to be laid, usually plank and later concrete, to the doors and to the privies. If there was no spring on the grounds, a well was dug. The next dictate of the manual was for separate entrances for boys and girls. Quote, to prevent the possibility of improper communication between the boys and girls passing in and out of the schoolroom, end quote. This concept began about 1870 and continued till about the 1930s. Not only were the entrances to be separate, but the playground was to be divided by shrubbery. This was to prevent injury to the weaker sex, as it was considered that boys played more roughly. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and she's pretty rough, so I can't give you guys a rough time on that one. The stone basement requested was often substituted by a woodshed on the back, as that was its main purpose. The building was not to exceed 1 story and no more than 52 a room. If a second story was needed, the boys were to use it, as it was considered, quote, injurious for young girls to climb stairs. They missed me somewhere along in that. I climbed a lot of stairs in my day. The basic plans recommended brick construction, but if that was not readily available, they could be adapted to wood or stone. I'm a bit prejudiced, although my own isn't stone. Many of today's brick structures were originally framed, with the brick added later when they could afford it. Some of these have again been covered over with either stucco or aluminum siding. My prejudice lies with the fact many of the loveliest schools in the province today are those of stone. In some areas such as Guelph and the Rideau Valley, stone predominates. In other areas such as Muskoka, there is only one stone school, but there's no doubt that it's the most handsome one in that county. Most schools had a porch on the front where the children hung their coats, and the doors always open to the outside in case of fire. Most had a bell which was housed above the building and a cupola or belfry. For this, the local contractor had a free hand in the design, so long as it complemented the building, and you will see some very bizarre belfries. The bell was not for decoration, but rather was to be heard for 3 miles radius, so the little devils knew if they were late for school, and their parents knew approximately when to expect them home, as it was rung again when classes ended. The actual layout of the building was all very carefully thought out. The front was to face the south, with the teacher's desk in the north end. Behind him or her was the blackboard along the whole wall to insulate against the winter winds. Now, have you ever heard of anyone using slate for insulation? The most important rule in the manual concerned the windows. This was for several reasons. One, of course, being the light source, but the other being ventilation. Firstly, the windows were to be at least 4 feet above the level of the floor, so the children could not see outside and be distracted. This is one rule you will notice was adhered to in nearly all schoolhouses. With the 12-foot ceilings, it actually makes for a good balance. If only one wall was to have windows, it was to be the east one, so that there were no shadows and the students would get the light from their left. Ventilation was considered so important, it took up 4 chapters of the manual and was referred to in all the other chapters. Actually, quite frankly, I think they were obsessed with ventilation. But anyway, if you've read my book, you will have heard this quote before, but it shows how adamant they were. Quote, "Father or mother, do you know what kind of an atmosphere your child is living in at the school? The air he is breathing has repeatedly been down into the lungs of 30, 40, or 50 of his schoolmates, and each time has been reinforced with a fresh supply of decaying matter, until it is loaded with poison which cannot be taken into the system without at least weakening the vital forces. Good ventilation does indeed cost money, but the doctor and the undertaker and the lot in the graveyard cost too. Which is the best investment?" Don't you agree? They were somewhat obsessed with ventilation. The conclusion to all this was that each child was required to have at least 9 square feet of floor space, and the windows were to open from both above and below. The main form of heating, which many still remember, was the Quebec heater. The pipe ran the full length of the room, and that was supposed to give off heat itself. Some schools, such as mine, had a platform which proved a great asset. Well, it has to me, but anyway. The teacher was higher, so she could really see what was going on, and on special occasions, it could be used for recitals or plays. Originally, there were benches along the outside walls, but this gave way to desks by 1850. The first of these had lids, which raised, but these were not successful, as, quote, "The raising of the lid interposes a screen between the teacher and the pupil, behind which acts may be performed, which would not be openly attempted. While the opening and shutting of the lids cannot but create noise," end quote. These desks were replaced, of course, with those which had a stationary lid, which were likely much less fun. There were many other necessities, such as a scraper for the children's shoes or boots, a pail and wash basin, brooms, as the room was to be swept twice daily, if possible, fire irons, clothes hooks, a teacher's desk, and a chair suitable to the office,
extra chairs for visiting trustees, chalk, sometimes homemade, and a blackboard wiper made from sheep's pelt, a handbell, a strap, and a thermometer to keep the temperature at an idealistic 67 degrees. At first the students had slates, but this later gave way to pen and ink. In order to keep the ink from freezing, whiskey was added to it. Last but not least was a teacher capable of using all these things. Likely a good one for the job was Mr. Hodgins, who thought up all this stuff and wrote the manual. He had a little trick with his students for the purchase of a clock. He convinced them it would be nice for them to know when classes began, and probably more important for them, when they ended. Once he convinced them, he got them to throw in part of their allowance, and then he added some more until the clock was purchased. Now, unfortunately, you can't see my clock, but my birthday present from my mother, believe it or not, probably brought in the street corner, is a schoolhouse watch. Anyway, at that point, we will move on to the pictures. So if someone could turn out the lights.
I think that's switch over. Try that. There.
Wow. Simplified lines.
Now, in my travels, the book ends up showing you the gorgeous schoolhouses in Ontario, but in my travels I encountered quite a few like this. You don't see it as much anymore because people have become wise of what can be done with a schoolhouse. But at that time, this was not uncommon. So the first ones are basically schools like that which have been abandoned for one reason or another, probably have fallen down since the pictures were taken. Middle of a cornfield. Some of these go back many, many years too, like probably close to 20 years. This one I know was taken down shortly after it was lightning that struck it on the side. It's in Kitchener-Waterloo. This one I always thought was charming and had great potential, and I hope someone would come along and do something, and presumably they have. Now there's your Johnny posts.
Yep.
Side by side. This one they have done, again, the Johnny Post, but they have done something. It's north of Belleville, and I believe it's now made into a Sunday school. It was adjacent to a church and on the property. So it was just sort of in limbo when I was by. And this is in the middle of a field, and you wouldn't have known it was a schoolhouse, presumably. And this is another one they have done something with. It's called Linden Valley, and it's now part, and it's in the book, part of a conservation area down south of London, Ontario. Cherry Valley, sorry. We switch to museums. These are schools which have been taken and made into museums to look like the way they were. The strange part is the building on the right, this is Fanshawe Park in London. The building on the right is a library, but was originally a schoolhouse. And the building on the left is made up to be the schoolhouse and wasn't that at all. That's what they do. This is in Port Perry on Scugog Island. And I happened to be there at historical weekend, and so the ladies were all dressed up in costume. And this one probably quite a few of you know in Markham at it was called Dixon Hall?
Hill.
Dixon Hill, yeah. See, I should know all of these, but I've done over 3,000, so I lose track of names after a while. And names are never my forte anyway. Now that's a double desk, which you certainly don't see many of. That's the inside of at Black Creek. This one is in Waterloo, one of the oldest. And it's just, unless they've changed it since I was there. Just boarded up. Goes back to 1820, I believe. This one is in Appleton. Again, the Johnny Posts are both on the same end. This is some sort of a museum, historical society. And anyone know where Appleton is? Near Ottawa, in the Ottawa Valley. This is the Brickley School, which is in Peterborough County and was presumed to be, or understood to be, the first separate school in the province of Ontario. This is in the Keene Conservation Area, and it was done over by Napier Simpson, the renowned architect, probably most of you know of, because he's certainly very close to this, was very close to this area.
And he did the entire conservation area. It's north of Peterborough. It's quite fascinating to see. But this was the schoolhouse, and this was the interior. Picture of the Queen, and those are the more common desks, but not with the lids that you can raise and hide behind and do nasty things. And there's, you see the pipe from the Quebec heater, but part of the theory was it gave off the heat. This is the oldest one I could track down, and it goes back to 1804, and it's in Thorold. And when I used to go and visit originally, the door was left wide open. There's no one anywhere around. Belongs to the Thorold Conservation Area. They're 4 miles away. And they have all the equipment inside, the desks and everything else, which the picture isn't here, but it is in the book. And I think they lock it up now, but it just astounded me that they leave this place open.
Where's in Thorold?
And, beg your pardon?
Whereabouts in Thorold? No, I know that. I lived there
Yeah.
for 17 years.
And there's another Thorold one here. I can't tell you exact. West Thorold?
Okay, so near Beaver Dams. Is that right?
Could be. Now, we'll get into belfries. And if you remember my comment about belfries, the contractor was allowed a free hand to do whatever he wanted, provided it was in keeping with the building. Actually, I should probably be a little closer for some of these vertical ones. The belfries, you're going to miss them.
Why?
This one I didn't dare go any closer because there were 2 Dobermans standing barking at me at the fence, so that was as close as I went. And this is a little town called Teeterville, over by Brantford. That's a women's institute. And Hockley Valley. This is a place called, it's also over near Brantford, Victoriaville. I thought it was quite Queen Victoria-ish, though it looked like her crown. Maybe that's what they had in mind. This one is at the Bruce Peninsula, and I couldn't help but thinking that it almost had an Indian look to it. It's not your typical belfry. That's my school. I had to throw that in. You'll see that on occasion, of course. This one they brought down and put in front. I'm surprised no one stole it. It's so handy down there. Actually, there was a cute story with my own because I didn't know anything about belfries. And shortly after I had the schoolhouse, my mother had been visiting in Barrie, which is an hour away from where mine is. And she said, you've got to go over, they've got a bell over there, it'd be perfect for your school. I said, Mother, I just drove up from work, I'm exhausted, it's a Friday night, I don't want to drive to Barrie in the traffic. She said, you've got to go, they don't know the price of school bells. And that was when school bells were $500, and this one was going for $75. So we trundled over to Barrie, we bought the bell. What I didn't know was, it worked out all right, but what I didn't know was, bells are all different sizes. They fit the bell by pure luck. This bell fit the belfry perfectly. Now, we get into what I call the unusual present uses, which is the part my publisher wasn't interested in. And this is Bob Cajun. It was then a furniture factory, and I had the funny feeling that it is no longer a furniture factory, but I always thought they kept it beautifully. And the nearby town of Fenelon Falls, the schoolhouse was a laundromat. Now this is also in Keene, where the conservation area is, but this is in the town right at the Four Corners with that beautiful log house, and as you can see, they've used the schoolhouse as a car garage. But they weren't the only people that did this. That's on the Isle of Quinte, and they did the same thing. I thought this part was kind of fun, but, you know, they didn't. This is used for baling hay. It's somewhere up near Owen Sound, if I remember correctly. But, you know, a gorgeous stonework, and there it is. Maybe it's changed since I was there. And that's used as a storage for MacArthur's living in Cambridge. This was one of my favorites because I have trouble even pronouncing it. It is a turnip processing plant. That's what it is in Lucan, Ontario. Oh, I love this one. It's a honey factory. It's near Guelph. And a butcher, he'd only converted the schoolhouse into a butcher shop about 6 weeks before I was there. This is near Brantford as well. The meat is actually hung in the schoolhouse, which is of course the building on the right, and then he added the part on the left, which is where he sold his product. This was near Ottawa, and it's a gas station, service station. So that's the part I think, Peter, this is not for sale. It is a real estate office. And I have another one that's very similar design, and it's a house that you'll see farther on that has those same windows that could appear to be, you know, a church, but they are both schoolhouses. This was one of my favorites, also near Brantford. It's owned by one of the Hellier, or it was owned by one of the Hellier family. And he bought the old schoolhouse, which was actually on his family farm. And he wanted to set up a riding arena, because they were very much in the horse business. And this arena had been built by Weyburn, Saskatchewan, and then they couldn't afford it. So he bought it, and the whole thing is added on to this old schoolhouse on the right. The part on the left is what was added in the 1850s. I don't think this is going to work in here, but anyway, you can see left from right. So the girls that work and look after the horses live in the part on the left, the old school, and then the rest is the arena. And it even has facilities in it. That's looking straight on at the schoolhouse with the two buildings either side. It even has facilities in the arena for out-of-town judges to stay. It's quite a complex. This was near Waterdown, and they were very practical and sensible. They took the roof off so that they didn't have a great big heating bill. I thought that was quite down to earth. This one is near in Huntsville area, and it's a parish hall. Actually, I think it's Baysville. And I had a letter from a minister the other day over near London, who has recently, his church has recently bought a schoolhouse, and he felt that I should know that it is being made into a church, and it will be duly consecrated and a cross put on top and a whole ball of wax. So I was quite interested. He had seen the article on Harrowsmith. I had an interesting response for that. This one's a community center, but intrigued me with the two buildings, the one stone and the other brick. You get a lot of community centers. They're not really, I'm kind of treading on thin water by calling it unusual uses, because that's pretty common. But these I happen to like, and I love the window in that one, the fan window. That's near Bob Cajun. This is south of Orillia, and it's a Loyal Orange Lodge. And this one is on the way to Peterborough, Cravenue, and it's a women's institute. And I don't know why to me it looks like, whether it's the pink brick, but they didn't paint it pink. That's the way it was. It just looks like a women's institute. This is a German hall near Kitchener. This is also in the Kitchener-Waterloo region. This was owned by a musical production company, and I think they have since gone bankrupt. I can't think of the correct word for what they were doing, but they were not producing music productions legally. This is an artist studio near Tottenham. This is used for drying tobacco near Delhi, like a host house of an old schoolhouse. And again, I thought, what a beautiful old stone building, and there it's used for that. This is near Bayfield, and it's a glass shop. And as you can tell, the schoolhouse is the building on the right, and then they added their own house and shop on the left. And this one is near North Bay. It's a tea room and a shop, and they've added considerably since I was there. This is inside where the shop tea room is all sort of scrunched in. And this is their living quarters. That's looking from above down to the living quarters. It's unbelievable how much is in that tiny building you saw. There's the kitchen for the tea room. This one is near London and always intrigued me. It's Lambeth, and it's a staircase manufacturing plant. But for them, the big thing was the height of the ceiling. They could do their 8-foot high staircase, having the 12-foot room to work with. Now this one I showed, it doesn't show what it's supposed to show. It's in the middle of a cemetery.
But it's a land survey office in Kingston, surrounded cataractly on 3 sides by a cemetery. But I don't even think that's why I originally put it in. I always just liked it. This one's in Wellington on the Isle of Quinte, and I can't tell you what it is now. It's been land survey offices, it's been legal offices. It was, I think, a women's institute. It was a seniors hall, so I'm not down there often enough to know what it is now. And you wouldn't think it as being a schoolhouse. And this is in Port Hope, and it was called Sunshine Heights Nursery School. Now these are what I call special schools. And this one is in Mallorytown, and it was a couple. When I met them, they were in their late 80s, and they had converted this 2-room school into a car garage service station. And the part on which you see there on the left was the service station, and on the right was their house. However, when they became 80, they felt that they were too old to run the service station, so they didn't retire. They set up pottery making. So the pottery shop was in the left. He still had his antique cars, and they went to the rallies and all that. But, so there it is, the pottery studio, Mercant for Muriel and Ken. But they did this conversion in 1928, and so I took it as being probably the first school that was ever converted to a home. This one's over by Hamilton and Mount Hope, and it's the school where the song was written when you and I were young, Maggie. He didn't write it right on the property, but the teacher to his pupil. This one's near Ashburn, which is not that far from here. I only found out the story by accident, but the local stonemason apparently approached the community and said he would build the schoolhouse for them for free, provided he could use different samples of his stonework so that they would then come to him to have him build their houses. So all 4 walls are a different type of stonework. Now that picture doesn't show it totally, but here you can see 2 perfect rectangles as to the rough. That's quite rough. Very different, I thought. And this is the one that I said had the long, boring story, but was the design that went to the Philadelphia Exposition in 1876, and that won the award. And the veranda apparently was totally original to the design of the schoolhouse. It was not added on by the present owner. The present owner is a bachelor who is, well, he may not be now. I don't know how many years ago I was there, but anyway, he may not be the owner either. He made it into a split-level house or boarding house, what he called it a boarding house. So the line you can see above the trees on the windows is actually the floor line he has created, so that there are 2. There's a whole unit above there and another one below. And I love the belfry, which he totally let to rot, and it's probably fallen down there. It was, last time I was by, which is at least 5 years ago, it was in way worse shape than it is there. I don't think he appreciated that aspect, or the fact that this had won an award for schoolhousing. But this is what happens, there are lots of people that really, he bought it because he could see the potential of dividing it into 2, making a duplex. He didn't care about the rest. There you can see the line again he's done between the windows for the 2 floors. This one is in Goodwood. You won't find it unless you know where it is. You'll never find it. It's in a huge, you know where it is? You do?
Not the building I don't, but I think.
Oh, Goodwood. Oh, okay. This is just outside in a huge farm, really. The couple bought the farm, and then they bought what you see in the center there is the schoolhouse that was Bear Cave School in Muskoka. They dismantled it and had it rebuilt on this property outside of Goodwood. And they used that for a few years and went for day trips and weekends, and found it confining, and they got Napier Simpson to build a house that he felt would complement the design. So you'll notice the vertical frame going with the horizontal logs of the original school. And the original school is strictly the kitchen of the house, and that's the house. And the original school, you can't even see there, is up on the right, the part up on the right. And there, the original was behind the trees on the left. So it was quite a house he added on. It's quite beautiful, actually. And that is one that I would never have heard about if, it hadn't been for friends telling me about it.
Owned by the bunch.
Where was it? It's near Melbourne, near London.
Have you ever seen the schoolhouse that if you take Highway 11 north through Bradford as though you're going for 400, and the first major intersection, I don't know the concession number, but if you follow that north for about 5 or 10 minutes, you'll find one on the left side. It's very beautiful. I know the person that started when it was just a little.
The lawyer?
No, he owns Allenby Electric, and about 14 years ago he refinished the inside, and now he's got it expanded where there's a pool behind it and everything. So you know which one I mean? George Skidrow, he's the owner.
Oh yes, that's in here. Oh wait a minute, no, the Skidrows I don't think it is. There's another one along that area that theirs was one of the originals I did. And I think theirs is in the book. They still have it then.
George lives here.
Oh, par for the course.
Yeah. My brother intends to get us papers.
No, I don't think theirs is in here, but I certainly was one of the first I did. These are all houses. Now this one, since I took that picture, I went back to rephotograph it to get a better picture, but the paint had all fallen off and it was a disaster. So we went with that one, that's the Alaquinty. But I have this thing about the little red schoolhouse, and I love touches of red. So that one brought that out. Now this is the other one at West Thorold, and it has a pool on the side, but that's very obviously a schoolhouse. This one you probably all know, and it may have changed since I took this. I knew the couple that did it originally. And he has died, I don't, and she's long since moved away.
Where was that?
Benville on Highway 9. But you may not notice it because it's way up, you know, as you're going along Highway 9, there's that. You don't know it, Doug?
I know where Glenville is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's back off the main highway.
Yeah,
I've
but
seen
it's, the highway goes in front, but if you're paying attention to your driving, which you should be, you wouldn't notice it. But I thought people in this area knew all these things, and you'd all ask me 19 questions about that one, and I didn't have time to look anything up. I'm glad you don't. This one is in Dorchester near London. I thought it was quite unusual. And the couple, he was a designer, and she was in the plant business. So the room on the left is their dining room, and it's all glass so that she could just line the whole window with plants. Tragically, their child was killed on the highway in front, and they split up and sold the school and whatever. So that picture's taken quite a few years ago. And this one's been finished since then too, Lloydtown. That was in the process. This one, if you went by now, you'd see nothing. Lots more has been done, but it's totally overgrown. It's in Wilfrid, Ontario, owned by an artist, Victor Tinkle, who likes gargoyles. And he was head of the Ontario College of Art. Well, the belfry's covered in gargoyles now. You can't see it in this picture, but the chimney has the three monkeys, see no evil, hear no evil. What you see there now shows you much more of what you would see if you drove by, because it's, as I say, so overgrown you can't see anything now, which is intentional on his part. I don't really like people looking at it. And I don't like to say too much, but I do have an opinion on it. That I just thought was cute that they put the old caboose in front. That's near Guelph. This one, I believe, went with that tornado 4 or 5 years ago that went down the Woodstock area. Vanessa. And I went back and couldn't find it, so I think it's gone. And this, I just like the colors. I thought it was kind of neat in Mono Township. This one I thought was, it's not that old, but it's a one-room school. I think it goes back to the 1950s, so it's certainly not old, but I admired their brilliance in putting a garage in the basement. I thought it was sensible. And that one was one I thought, well, you wouldn't know it was a schoolhouse when you drove by. It's over near Strathroy. And there's, that's near St. Mary's, but again, I love the red touch, and I do like those red Johnny posts. I'd probably do the same thing myself, but I'll be damned if I'm going to get up in the roof and do it. Another one that you wouldn't, believe it or not, even the dog was black and white. He didn't pose for the picture, but he wasn't a Dalmatian, but he was black and white. But again, one that you wouldn't, necessarily pick out as being a schoolhouse. But where they do the sunburst, that is the logo for the school right in there.
this one was owned by a medical hypnotist at Kitchener-Waterloo. And I was a little nervous to go and visit him, but it turned out to be very pleasant. And his wife was his secretary, and she was very charming, and they were really a darling couple. And I'd always really liked the building. I don't think it looks the least bit like a schoolhouse, but I really liked the building. You can see how I leaned to the stone. And this is the one in Muskoka that I said is the school in Muskoka. It's owned by a couple that, he is a professor of architecture at Carleton. And if you went up there now, it's upward. It doesn't look the least bit like that. They've added a full glass room on the left side there, and they're always adding things and changing them. But I still thought it was unusual. This one's the one on the back cover of the book, so I don't show, so you'll all go out and buy the book. I don't show the front of the school. But it's the West Montrose Covered Bridge. It's right there. Does anyone know the people that own this, by the way? So I can speak freely? I thought it was very unusual in interior design because they were travelers. They traveled around the world in their retirement. But when they decided to convert the schoolhouse, they chose to do a room to commemorate each trip. So one room is totally done in a Mexican motif, and one is done in an African motif, and another one is done in a Dutch motif, which I think could all be very charming, except I didn't think it went with the schoolhouse. And the one unique thing they did was he collected walking sticks, canes, whatever you want to call them, on all his travels, and they put them up. They only have about 6 steps as you go in the front door, and instead of putting a banister up, he put all the walking sticks up like a railing. And that was darling, except they had black and white flock wallpaper behind it, so until they showed me, I never even noticed the walking sticks. But I thought that was a very clever idea. And the only nasty letter I got about my book was from the lady who owns this schoolhouse. And she generally didn't like anything about the book or anything I'd done. But this was built by the stonemasons that built the Rideau Canal, and it overlooks the Rideau Canal, and it's not far from Merrickville. And that's the same school. But you can, but you can't, and the way in the background there is the Rideau Canal. This one I just liked. In the middle of the field. So I had to throw in the date with the leaves. I thought it was pretty. That to me, it's on the road to Guelph, and I just thought it was kind of an unusual combination of the yellow brick, red brick, and the stone. And this one is another one. Now this isn't that far from here actually. It's outside of King City, but I figured you would not pick as being a schoolhouse if you were driving by. And likewise that one, which is on the road to Oxbridge. The base, not the foundation, but I mean from the front door below, that is all the original school. And they just went from there. And that one I thought was very stately. It's down near Blenheim. I cheated a little because I'm sure it's not a one-room school. And this one, what amused me was that I never noticed the date on the roof till I came home. I was looking at my pictures and then I spotted it. Right, and it's a slate roof too. And that's another unusual combination of yellow and red brick. This one is near mine. This is near Cannington, and it was built by Mackenzie, who built the railroad through there. And his workers tend to slack off. I don't know whether any of you will pick a flaw in there.
Yeah.
One brick short on the left. This one I just liked. It was near London, but I thought what a perfect duplex. And it had a red door. I mean, they hadn't quite finished their paint job here. This is near Ottawa. I think the idea was gray with white, but I thought it was stately looking. And this one I'm not too sure about the paint job. It didn't have any red in it, but you know, everyone has their own taste. This was another Napier Simpson. He tended to get a lot, obviously being a restoration architect. And what you see there is pretty much the schoolhouse, and then you can see to the back and to the side the additions that were added very tastefully. And this is near Collingwood. This one is
is only 5 miles up.
That's Orangeville. That was Evans' house.
That's right. This is only 5 miles up the road from the other one on the exact same road, and I thought, how different. There are actually, in the book, there are 3 on that same road, and they're all totally different, but I thought anyone who knows the area will say, well, she claims she did Ontario, but I know those 3, and they're all on the same road. I don't have the 3rd one here. This Napier Simpson did as well, and this is Walters Falls, which is also that area. Very charming schoolhouse. And funnily enough, the window over the front door is the same window I have, and mine's over near Lindsay. This one was near London, Eckfrey, I think it's called. And they took out all the windows and sealed the whole unit so it would be a dust-free environment. And then sealed the belfry as well, and I never saw that done anywhere else. This one I like just because of the desk out in front, although I thought they were very, very brave to put it up there. It's used part of the ornamentation. That I just like. Pinkerton is the name of the town. And that's near Owen Sound. It was written up in the Imperial Oil Review, and it was the man who actually did the conversion. His great-grandfather had built the school. This is the one that supposedly Diefenbaker attended in Newstead, Ontario, when he came back from Saskatchewan. And the woman who owned it, when I photographed it, lived in the Manulife, and I lived in the Manulife, and she would not acknowledge my letters. And I thought, gee, we live in the same building. Anyway, this one reminded me that they'd done more of a ski chalet concept. It's over by Bob Cajun. And then you notice the desks on the wall on the side. This is an artist studio in the Orangeville area. Very pretty. Again, the churchy type window. And I think a bit of a homemade belfry. I don't think that was part of the original design. This one is certainly in the book, and I was going to say Napier Simpson, he didn't do it. A couple did it who still have it in their late 80s now. He was really into wrought iron work. So the gate on the right was from an old building in Toronto that was torn down to make apartments called the Lonsdale. And what it says over the gate is the Ronsdale, because his name is Ron. He took the L out and put the R in. But their headboards in their bedroom are wrought iron, and they have a French lift. They use it as a divider between the kitchen and the dining room. This one is very, very old picture. It's Thornton, Ontario. When I first started doing this, it's about 18 years ago. The windows for the school are all on that side, as is quite common in old schoolhouses. It was owned by a lady living on her own, and she collected dolls. And it's not one of the more glamorous conversions, but one night her dog, in a thunderstorm, started to bark abnormally. And she thought it was the thunderstorm. She admitted it was a rather loud clap of thunder. And about an hour later, the policemen were at her door. A plane from Camp Borden had crashed on the other side of the house. With the windows being on the one side, she never noticed. Now, obviously, in a thunderstorm, she's not about to go out and see what the noise is. And so that's, an instance where the windows didn't help. This is owned, you see it driving north on Highway 400, owned by an airline pilot of Air Canada. And he did all the woodwork himself. This is owned by Walter Tavel and his late wife, and they were bird watchers. So it was right in the Mono area. And that's what they went for, was bird watching. You can see binoculars, and they'd sit on the milk pails and look out the windows. And this was the addition they added with their own room. This is the one that's on the cover of the book, only it was gray when I took that picture. And they've done a lot to it, I'm told, since the book came out. I haven't been by. Actually, a bit of local gossip that some of you may know. The couple that converted that school, which is the cover of the book, the husband is Ken Murray, who is the lawyer for Bernardo. And that's the interior. when Sherry had it. Her in-laws then bought it and did it in a quite different interior. This one I really loved. It's south of Strathroy, and I love that walk with the leaves. And you can see there's a little piece of wood above each window. And there were 8 windows on the building, and above each originally had been stained glass. When they bought this house, the place was infested with rats and bats and you name it. So nearly all of the windows were gone, but you'll see later on where they've managed, you can't see it there, but on either side of the front door they have used the 2 stained glass windows that weren't completely desecrated. Now this is one where they raised the floor so that they could see out, instead of keeping that floor level where the windows are so high so the kids can't see out. So all their wainscoting became useless because the room was halfway at the wainscoting, so he stripped it all off and finished his kitchen cupboards with that wainscoting. And there's the front hall, and that's the 2 windows that survived. They used it on either side of the front door. And the slate from the blackboards is the floor. I've seen one other instance where they did that. And this is I mentioned way back with the one that's a real estate office looking church-like, very Gothic. This is in the similar area, but certainly is a school. And that's inside the schoolroom. It was. And looking to the 2 additions, they put a sunroom on the back, and the addition that you saw in the picture. This is owned by 2 ladies up near Clifford. And I thought it was particularly, and it's right beside a cemetery. It disobeys all the rules. And that's inside. They have one of the most spectacular tin ceilings one of the only ones I saw actually, original tin ceiling. And original lamps they kept. Now this is the one I was thinking of by Bradford, but this isn't Skidderall's, this is the Evanses. Converted it and has a swimming pool. But I'm told they have sold it. I think they wrote and told me. That's the inside. The ceiling line was just above where the present ceiling is, where you can see they've done the upstairs, and they just opened the whole room up. And this is their bedroom, but what intrigued me, of course, were the old school desks being used as bedside tables. And they also had one downstairs that they used as a phone table in the front hall, which I think is in the book. I tried to use different pictures than what are in the book. And this was mine, which was originally, the front room goes back to 1851, one of the oldest in the province, and the back room is 1881. Lorneville was a railroad junction that's now a ghost town, which, as my former husband used to say, has a population of 75, including dogs. And the reason it was written up in Harris, the car is not mine. When I looked at this today, I thought, well, that's nice. I don't know how I ended up with that picture because it ain't my car. And I know it is. It is a friend who used to visit from the States, but that gives you the concept of the 2 rooms. The reason Harold Smith chose it was the lowest end of the line in conversion price-wise, as opposed to the other one in there, which is over $300,000, and mine was about $12,000 to convert. That's the living room, and the stage is where the kitchen is behind the old barn board. And the red that you see in the middle of that is the original chimney that I had no idea was there because it was all covered by blackboard, not wall. And I kept the original lamps. Those were from the back room actually, and I'd been rewired, and I had 7, and that's why there's the 4 light fixtures in the living room, dining room, and 3 in the kitchen, and 1 got broken. So I could have gone with 2 in the kitchen, and then I lost my nerve. I thought, what if one breaks again and we're really sunk? So we've got 2 hidden in case of emergency, and cheaper ones over the kitchen. And that shows you the lights again, looking from the stage out. I've changed it since then. Of course, I change it all the time. And that's the master bedroom, which was basically a matter of taking one room that had 4 windows and putting a partition between the 4, and it made for a huge master bedroom. My design bit I think is okay, but my idea of distance and size are nil. And so I didn't know what a huge room that would end up being. So that's again part of the room, and my best friend that I lost about 4 or 5 years ago. But that whole wall that you see in front of you was all solid blackboard, and I have kept the slate. Or, for what I don't know, but for something someday. That is the end, but I have one other rule that isn't schoolhouses, but I'll run through it quickly, and in this heat you'll probably kill me for doing it. But it's, I thought you might get a kick out of them, being as it's my book that got rejected. 2 books that got rejected. When I finished school, it's my publisher's full cooperation, I went to do one on converted churches, and also one on unusual conversions, which is barns and mills and things like that. And then when it came time, when push came to shove, he decided no go. So I still have the pictures, and I still hope to do something with it. So I will throw some of the churches at you. This one I do not have an exterior for because it wasn't a transparency. But this is one I thought was quite spectacular in near Normandy, Ontario. And that's from the bedroom. They put the railing and looking down to the main living room. Once again, the same thing, only the other side. Showing you the original windows. And that window in the kitchen just looks for miles over fields. It's quite spectacular. And that's a close-up of it. I just thought it was very tastefully done. This one's near Bethany, Ontario, and the actress Kathy Michael McGlynn, who was the star of Cats, was one of the owners. The present owner is a lawyer and his wife, and she unfortunately fell off the balcony one night. You can barely see the balcony up there on the right. And she thought she was in their city house and went to go to the washroom and fell over instead of where she was supposed to go and broke her neck. So I don't know whether they've kept it. But I love this concept of the dining room up on the nave. And it's hard to make this room light because the ceiling's black. They painted the whole thing black. This one's near Hillsborough. It's on the Isle of Quinte. And I thought the bedroom was kind of different for a church. And the mirror she made out of one of the, part of one of the windows that was actually there. This one's near King City. You may know it. And that's the interior. Very churchy lights and the big churchy windows. This one's north of Kingston. And I kind of like it because I love that door where you look right through the glass outdoors. I love that concept of being outside. And you certainly don't feel like you're in a church in there. This is used as a ski chalet in Singhampton, Ontario. It's one of the first ones I photographed. And the 2 chairs up in the front are bishop's chairs, which they strangely enough had before they ever had any inclination to buy a they converted it by an old church. Same one. This is also a ski chalet in Glen Huron near Collingwood. Same one. See the dining room on the right, the kitchen on the left, and then the bedroom's upstairs. You go down to the living room.
Near the sock stuff.
Yeah, which is appropriate for a ski chalet, I thought, too. This was the one that I wanted to go on the cover of the church book because I thought it was so different. It's the only one I ever saw that still had an awning. And I love the river running in front. It's near Appleton, which is in the Ottawa Valley. The interiors are disastrous, so you don't see any of them. And this is Mitchell, Ontario, which is a church made into a gift shop. Little bit of stuff. And some of you have probably been there to the church restaurant in Stratford. The interior comes off somewhat dark because it's supposed to be a dark, intimate environment. This is owned by Robert Gage, the hairdresser, who has spent a bloody fortune on it. He's an absolute hoot. He's a real character. He does Princess Di's hair when she's in town, and anyway, when you name them, he does their hair. And he bought this church, and I'm told by the locals that when they had the open house the first weekend, there was nothing but Mercedes and BMWs and everything in the town of Warkworth, Ontario. And that is his living room. I don't know that I can explain it, but that's the that's his dining room. And they're cupids, there are all sorts of cupids hanging from the ceiling. You can't really, and I was corrected, they aren't cupids. There's something else hanging from the ceiling, as well as the chandelier. But he's had a lot of fun with it. This one's in Kettleby, and the woman owns a store in King City, Ivy Ridge? I think that's the name of her. Anyway, she's done darling things with it, but for some reason the interior shots just didn't come out that well. It was Christmas time, and she decorated it for Christmas. And she had the table all set for Christmas dinner. Yes. The Logans. This one actually has a sad story. It's the last church I'll show you. I'm sure you remember the couple that were found in the trunk of their car in Lawrence Park. Happened to be my cousins. And this is Ian. It was Ian and Nancy Blackwood. Ian was my cousin. This is his sister Sue's converted church, which is on that same property where they were murdered. But the family have done very well, and they've pulled themselves together, and she's kept the church, and they still, you'd never find it. It's way, they bought it, and they had it torn down and rebuilt on, see, this was the old family farm where this murder happened. And they had rebuilt this church there probably 10 or 15 years before that happened. Two of their daughters were married from this church, like in the local church, and then had the reception there. So it's way back in a field behind the house. And she told me the other day, the man who is renting the house, she's bought the house to keep it in the family. And Mike Duffy, is it the guy that's into horses and a real character? No, Mike Duffy's the politician, political newsman. Mike, yeah, it's Mike something.
Mike Duffy's a newsman.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, no, this is the guy that does the horse races. Mike something. Anyway, he's bought or rents the house, so they've kept it in the family. But that's the church, and then they added on this, they also bought this log house and rebuilt it and added it onto the church. So that's an inside story that most people don't even know about. Now we go from churches to unusual, and this is Mother Parker's tea. Has a converted railway car, which is the railway car that took the King and Queen across Canada in 1939. And Mr. Higgins uses it for private entertaining and sometimes family entertaining. That's the main salon in it as you enter in. And there's the kitchen, your typical railway kitchen, except that it's got Mother Parker's products also. I doubt if it didn't. Well, I suppose it did in 39. It didn't, but they did. And that's the dining room. The King and Queen did their thing. And they lived on board that railway car for the solid week. And there's only a shower. The Queen managed, Queen Mother now, managed to survive this shower for a week. And that's a railway station, actually very near me. It's near Argyle, made into a house. And that is what was the ticket wicket, is now the dining room. This one, I don't have an exterior of, unfortunately. I do in pictures, but not in transparencies, is a typical plain box car garage that this woman bought, and she has made it into a pied-à-terre for herself. She bought the house, the garage behind, and her kids live in the house, and she lives, actually not sort of this area, Erin, but she does business in Toronto 2 or 3 days a week, so she comes and stays in this. So she converted this car garage into this tiny bachelor apartment. So the door you walk in is the door on the left. That was the original door you walked in when you were coming into it as a car garage. And the storage was on the left. There's the bathroom and the kitchen. And then when you turn and look from the kitchen, there's her bedroom. And there are the big windows where the garage door was. And it just shows with a simple basic building what you can do. But Select Homes didn't agree with me, so they wouldn't do it. And this was a carriage house in Port Hope, and the woman was 78 when she converted it into a house, which I think was quite a challenge. And that's the staircase, which is the spectacular part you'll see later, and the dining room below. And this is the top of the stairs. This is a coach house, which is probably very familiar to anyone who's driven up Bayview Avenue, and just south of Lawrence. That's the back, the part you'd never see, and between that fence and the coach house is a huge, beautiful swimming pool. And this couple converted it in the 50s, and they've decorated it inside in the 50s. Now, this is not one of the better photographs that I have, but it's the only one I have of this particular building to show. Right in the very middle there, you see there's a black chair. It's all original Courvoisier furniture. But that black hole is actually a piece of glass with plants sitting on it, and underneath was where they would bring the cars in to change the oil. So they kept it under that glass so you can look down and see the compartment where the oil was changed, where they go into, change the oil for the cars. And then where the windows are for the pool, of course, is where you would have driven in those days. This is not your typical coach house, but it's in Rosedale, behind the house. And that's the living room of the same one. This one's in Coburg. I actually got onto a whole thing with coach houses, and then somewhere along the way we dropped it. Shows you the size of them. That's inside the one in Coburg. There's the dining room, which is sort of set up on this little separate whatever. And I was intrigued by what a great use for that empty shelving down the side for books. Great way to use what could be wasted space, but it isn't wasted. This is a barn which you could drive by north of Coburg, and I'm sure you would not gather that it had been converted into a house. And that's the back that you don't see from the highway. Now the part that's the house is what's on the left, and basically what's on the right they left as it is. And that's the living room, dining room, with the dining room kitchen, their bedroom is upstairs, and downstairs is the living room, really in the basement of the barn and the foundation part. This is a mill. I have lots of mills, and I love mills. This is near Dartford. It's just a quaint, cute little, very simple mill, and a very simple interior. Nothing extravagant about it. This one's in Hillsburg, right in downtown Hillsburg, but you wouldn't see it because you have to drive down a long driveway between two houses. I had great difficulty with my interiors because stone walls do not bounce lights off. They absorb it. And it's not quite as dark as the pictures would appear, but it is dark. And that's their deck. Another mill in Baldwin, which is now a bed and breakfast, taken after a pouring rain. That's the dining room. And they were just they hadn't finished converting it when I was there. They have now. And that's the same one, but it shows over at the left, you can see the falls to the right of the willow tree.
When did you take these pictures?
Probably, yes.
It's Bavarian used to own.
That's right,
But it is known, he isn't
No.
owning any longer.
No, the mill, Miller, I think it is, James Miller owns it now.
The chap who used to be the head of one of the television stations.
That's
in
right.
Toronto.
One of the founders of Global or City, I've forgotten.
Yeah,
Global,
City,
I think.
I think it's City, at
And,
any rate.
yeah, I'd forgotten that part. Yes, they've done the conversion. I had a nice letter from them because they spend the winter in Florida. This is another mill near Elora. Not the Elora mill, but in that vicinity, owned by an architect. Very modern, but very effective. I love the dining room with that door with the glass that you look outside and you still have the stone. And then the stairway which runs up beside it. The dining room is actually below, right below where I'm standing.
Did you ever get into what it cost to heat this place?
No.
Thousands.
I did with one, actually, that we'll come to. This was my favorite, and it's my pet peeve, and I shouldn't get into it, but Century Home did this as a cover story in their last issue, not the issue that came out this week, the previous one. I went and photographed the mill, can't even think of the name of it now, anyway, it's north of Kingston, and the people were just darling, and they said that Century Home had been at them for 5 years to do it, but they would never let them. Now that they were selling it, they would agree to have a story done. I was doing it for the book, not as a magazine article, but I was so impressed with the mill, I wanted to do a story on it. So I wrote Century Home, whom I'd done work with in the beginning, and I said, they've agreed to let me do it, whatever. Will we do it? Will you, are you agreeable? And they wrote back a very nice letter, but they said, well, thank you very much, but I mean, this is indicative of the industry now, which Ron, my pal from school, can appreciate. They're all using their own people now, not freelancers. So they said, yes, we are very interested in doing the mill. However, we will do it, but we will use only our own people. And I nearly wrote back and said, dear Tom, thank you very much. I just shot myself. But I didn't. Anyway, I lived through it and then came out. I mean, it is a spectacular story and a spectacular mill. And that's inside the guest bedroom. And that's their bedroom, which looks out over that pond, the lake, whatever you want to call it, that they see. And actually across is an old church where they still go for weddings. And this one I did get a cover story on City and Country Home, and is a spectacular mill. And this one I did discuss heating, and they said it wasn't that bad because they reconverted all the original old equipment in the basement and used some of that to heat it, or to heat the basic principle of a heat pump. That's their living room. And as you notice, they've used the old cart as a coffee table. A lot of the equipment in that building is original and regenerated to some different use. But it was really a $1 million home. And that's their veranda. This is another one you'd never hear of, but I hope someday to do a story on it. He's agreeable. Just outside of Mallory Town. Trying to think of the name of the town. Anyway, it was a hayloft, not an up and down hayloft, but he told me it was a hayloft, so I got to go by what I'm told. And he collects British Royal memorabilia. So there's the front door, and driving by, you would never suspect all the goodies that he has in there. Pictures of the royal family, the chairs. They're actually, the chair on the left is one of a pair that the Queen and Prince Philip used when they opened the St. Lawrence Seaway. Everything in there is actually of significance, and he's met the Queen on countless occasions. Even the guest towels in the bathroom had Prince Charles and whatever, the logo on them. This is the end, you'll be relieved to know. And this was to be the end of my Unusual Conversions book. Actually, it was to be the cover, I thought. I love this. It's a silo. It was done, silo on a farm, done about 20 years ago. They just made it into a kind of a little guest house for their kids and a change house for their pool room. Very simple, but I think quite gorgeous. Now there is the staircase and the view out the front door. And that's what's on the main floor. And to the left, that cupboard you see is actually like a little kitchenette. So their kids and grandchildren come and stay there now and use that apartment. And that was my finale, because I just loved that. I mean, I thought, you know, what you can do with an old silo. Yeah. So there you are. They aren't all schools. We threw in some others, but I'll answer, or try to, any questions that you may have. I probably can't answer them, but I'll try.
Do you have any? Just north of Newmarket here on number 11 highway.
I can't honestly answer, because what I did was, when I finished the book, I gave all my material to the Ontario Archives. I felt it was a shame that it sat in a file that nobody else could get the use of when I'd spent all these years putting it together. So everything is now in the archives.
Do you recall any?
That I do not recall, though.
No.
Is that the school by the Green Lane? Because it's
Yep.
empty for at least
Yes, then I
25
do.
years.
I do.
That's the one.
Or I did.
I'm not, yeah, that's-
Yes, you did, or you did? Or
Yes,
you
I did.
Yes, you did what?
I have a picture of it.
Oh, you did?
Yes, but it would be in the archives now.
How old would it be?
Oh, that I couldn't remember. I was at 3,000.
Wow, poor memory.
Yeah, I do have a poor, I honestly admit I have a poor memory.
That's the one that the East Oldbury Historical Society is in the process of trying to save. So. But I don't have a picture of it,
Oh.
particularly with the belfry on it, which was taken off in 48.
But the archives have material like that. One of the things that surprised me is you would think, in researching a book on old schoolhouses, that the place you would go is the boards of education. Boards of education, for the most part, not all, were useless. We don't have our records, we don't know where they are, they're locked away, you can't have access to them, whatever. So I thought, well now, what will I do?
So what I was really interested in were the schools that were still standing, rather than the ones that, you know, had been torn down or fallen down. So I thought, who travels more dirt roads than the OPP? So I got a hold of a list of all the OPP detachments and contacted them. And the response was absolutely overwhelming. I mean, some ignored the letter. Some wrote back and gave me, you know, 1, 2 to 10. These are the schools in our district. Others wrote back with complete histories on the schools. Some went and took their own pictures and sent the pictures. I couldn't believe the interest that they took in it. So that's where I was mainly able to track them all down. Because being as I was going to photograph them for my own records, I only wanted ones that were there.
Well, I have 40 pictures of school pictures. But nobody took a step back and took a picture of the school, at least that I found.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to have that many. And I think the earliest one is 1918. So it's amazing to have those things.
Yes.
They're having a reunion in August for 200 people.
Hope you don't have to cater it.
I don't,
But somebody has.
but somebody does.
Any other questions?
You know, the church conversion belongs to John Gillette, about 14 miles southeast of Owen Sound. He's converted the church up there, done a beautiful job on it.
No, don't think I do. You don't know the name of the town?
Out in the country, it isn't in the town, it's in the country. And I can give you directions for it, but I've only been there once, but I know the lad since he was born.
Oh.
He runs his own business from the place. He's a commercial artist.
And his last name's Gillette?
Yes.
No, I haven't come across that one. And then, of course, once the publisher decided not to do it, my own for it somewhat went, although I still want to pursue it. I think there's a market for it somewhere there. I mean, I think people enjoy seeing these things and seeing inside other people's houses. That's basically what it boils down to.
You mentioned slate blackboards. In this school, in the Poplar Bank School, the original blackboards were plaster. With a rough coat of plaster, then they put a very thin coat of black plaster over it, which looks just like a slate. Then in later years, they covered it up with slate. Well, the kids have gotten into that and broken all the slates, and there are the original blackboards behind it, with writing still on it and hatch marks and this kind of thing. Of course, they've smashed up some of that, but I had never seen blackboards like that.
No, I had not.
But I guess they were quite, this was 1885, this schoolhouse was built, so I would think that it was fairly common.
Probably if I had seen it and gone in, I would have presumed it was slate and not pursued it further.
Well, I don't know when you were there, but
Yeah.
the slate blackboards may have been there.
No, I probably wasn't inside actually, because I didn't attempt to go inside any when I arrived on the scene. If I felt it was one I wanted to follow up, I would get a hold of the owner and write them a letter. I sort of use the standard line, you never know if that's the day their dog was hit by a car, or what condition you're hitting someone in. If you just knock on the door and say, here I am, can I photograph your home? So I always prefer to deal with it by letter, and then they can stop and think about it. Do we want this, don't we? And usually they're quite, you know, I very rarely had someone be negative about it.
And the chap with the place with the walking sticks,
Yes.
was his name Cooper?
No.
Because Russ Cooper from Black Creek Primary Village has quite a collection of
Oh,
walking
really?
sticks, yeah. Amazing collection of walking sticks. You should be surprised what they jammed in walking sticks. Incredible umbrellas for swords and guns and little seats that you could take out and watch the horse race. All in a little thing about an inch in diameter.
My former husband had one with 4 flasks in it, which I lent to my mother. And the top, when she had an accident, and she's a teetotaler, and the top fell off, and one of the flasks fell out, smashed all over. She said, now what do I do? I said, just keep going.
So why did the one woman dump all over your book?
She just didn't like anything about it.
No reason, just?
No, she said that several things were inaccurate, but from the records I had, I went back and checked right away, and they certainly were exactly as per what I had in the material, and I'd researched.
There's one in every book.
That's
huh?
right.
Yeah.
You know, I sort of expected that. But I mean, she followed it up with a good nasty letter, and Yeah, yeah, I mean, most people are flattered if their house is included in a book. They don't take that tack, but
Could I take that a little further in with one of the pictures from
Sure.
your book? I
Uh-oh.
find this very interesting because this is one that you showed. And these are friends of ours, or they were in this situation. For something to do one day, they decided to go to an auction. And the auction turned out to be a schoolhouse. So they weren't really sure what they should do. And there was a real estate person there, and they said, well, put in a bid, just put in a bid, you may get it. They put in a bid for $1,200. They had their schoolhouse. That time was about 102 years old. Anne has researched this, and it is in her book.
it's the one that I said was the windows, when I first went by, I thought it was a church. So I think it's stunning.
It's a beautiful buff. The bell is in the steeple. And when Bob was up painting the steeple, my husband, being the joker he is, he pulled the curtain. And he just about put Bob back on the ground. They put the addition on, they brought in an architect to do that so that they wouldn't lose the continuity of an old schoolhouse. It's quite intriguing. Not as many schoolhouses have a single door. The beams in the basement and the supports, they were all carved. Nothing that was disagreeable. The odd little heart with initials in the middle. But it was just fantastic the work they did with that.
It's so pretty.
Then they ended up selling it. They used it as a retreat, but as people grow older, they could not keep the grounds up. They had an acre, when you described the fencing around the trees, and there was a baseball down there. And Bob said, if anything happens to me, Betty will not be able to maintain this. So they sold it. Would you like to guess the prices?
1,300.
Well, it was close to $200,000. But they had done a lot of work, used the old lights, used the old grates. But can you imagine? Betty always says, that was so funny. We went to an auction, and she said, I thought I might buy a new table. So that's what happened.
Well, I found that most of these schools, if not all of them, came from farmers, the property. And great many of them, when they sold the property to the school board, the agreement was that if the school was ever closed, the property would revert back to the farmer. And one just up the road from me on the 5th concession in East Goldenbury, the Hope School, was such a case. And of course, then they had to get rid of the building. So the building was torn down, and the property now is back with the original farmer, and they built a modern house on it.
I believe in this case, the farmer donated the land.
But often they will say,
The
we could help.
family who originally donated the land were still working the farm.
As a matter of fact, the Poplar Bank School in 1862, it was given to the school board, but the provision was if the school was closed, the person who owned the rest of the farm would have the first opportunity to buy it back, the property back, which is what happened.
This brings me back to Anne, because the Joneses were very happy with your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Very happy. I have your book, you autographed it for me. You don't remember.
It was the least I looked.
Did you bring
No.
your full
No.
books?
No, up
Oh, of course.
up at your schoolhouse,
Oh, yeah.
which if you haven't seen Anne's schoolhouse, it is terrific.
Oh, thank you.
You say it's near Argyle?
Yeah,
Whereabouts near Argyle?
Two
Glen
miles
Iron?
south.
Oh, south of Argyle.
Yeah.
Okay.
In
Towards
Argyle.
Woodville,
Yeah, halfway in between.
on 47.
48, not right on 48, just in 48. 46, sorry.
46.
Mother's is on 48, my mother's cottage, just
47 is that?
yeah,
46,
about 4 houses, not property, 4 houses west of 46.
You remember when our gal, that corner
Oh,
store, was
absolutely.
just nothing but tires?
Ray
all
Fleming.
around?
Yeah, I've gotten to know Ray Fleming, funnily enough, quite well. The son of the man who had it. Yeah.
And on behalf of everyone here at the Newmarket Historical Society, I'd like to present this token
Oh,
of
thank you.
appreciation.
Am I allowed to open it?
Yeah, open it.
Oh,
Yeah, open
I have to open it,
it.
oh,
Show it to
okay.
him.
Gee, my daughter won't be pleased when I go home and say I got a present. Can I open it? Oh my
It
goodness.
says on the back what it is, an album of, he's got his own story to tell you.
Isn't that something? Of course, without my glasses, I can't even see anything I know. Oh, isn't that great? Thank you. Super.
The only reason that school was there because they had a metal roof put on it in the 40s. And you see this one piece is off.
I was going to say, was it struck by lightning? Because there's a hole right
I
there
think,
as well.
I don't know why there's a hole, but some of it was torn off with the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And,
It's a popular bank school up
John,
on
I
the street.
I gotta get up there and paint those rooms.
and you see this school has a wing here.
Mm-hmm.
And it originally had a wing on the south side, and these were the only windows it had on this side. So they tore off the wing on the south side, and they put in a big window, huge window, on the south side. So
Mhm. Oh, isn't that great? Thank you. That's super. I should put that up in my schoolhouse.
Let's see it.
Oh, sorry. Did any of you attend?
My girlfriend did.
Doug Axon did the photographs.
My girlfriend did.
What's her name?
She's not here.
What's her-
Eileen, she was Eileen Blizzard.
Yes.
Eileen Mitchell.
Yeah. She just lived down the road from it. The old farmhouse that's
Yeah.
no longer there.
Anne's probably going to stay around for a while. We've got lots of refreshments up here. You can wander around the school. We're invited out to visit here to see a school that hasn't been